A baby is born with a strangely mature consciousness, happily watched by his new mother. He opens his status panel and notices that he has returned to level 1 and also that he simply has no name at all. Beside the woman, a man addressed as Your Majesty approaches and compliments the child's eyes, which look like the mother's. She, in return, thinks the baby's mouth is identical to the father's. In front of a crowd of kneeling subjects, the king chooses the name of his son, Noah Ararat, who receives the title of 13th Imperial Prince. After seeing his status updated with his new title, Noah is shocked by the importance he seems to hold in this new life. The king asks a subordinate what the boy's aptitude is, and he answers that it is water. In that case, considering that Almeria is home to many members of the Water clan, His Majesty declares that this will be his son's fief. At the same moment, Noah notices that among the available elements in his status, a +S appears in the water attribute. The king asks Cruz to show what his son is capable of doing. Then Cruz begins an enchantment that develops Noah's water abilities to a new value, SS. Immediately, the people present are astonished to realize that Noah's power has already awakened on his very first day of life. An extremely rare occurrence that delights the subjects. After all, nothing is more incredible than being the king's son and being born with such an impressive talent. Noah Ararat was born in a kingdom whose capital is located on a plain surrounded by imposing mountains, known as the Country of Warriors, the Mills Empire. This country is living its golden age and has been attracting a remarkable flow of money and development. Noah, as the 13th biological son of the man who ruled these prosperous lands, was loved by the subjects for his talent and personality. 6 years after his reincarnation, the prince noticed that everyone sees his status as if his water attribute were SS, while only he sees it as SS, an addition made by his subordinates. For example, the S in water comes from the fief of Almeria, to which he belongs by his father's decision on the day of his birth. The rest comes from his maids. By the way, as he grew and gained more subordinates, the young noble discovered that his level can increase infinitely. Not only having this unexpected privilege, Noah was also seen by the maids as someone who, despite his young age when most kids of his generation prefer spending the day causing mischief, was personally calm, focused, and strangely mature, emanating an air of leadership that not even many adult nobles could convey. Even so, of course, there are still limits to what a 6-year-old child can do. One day, Noah was approached by Evelyn, a beautiful maid specialized in receiving visitors. She informs him that the 2nd and 4th princes have come to visit, and that he should eat calmly so he can receive his brothers. Since the crown prince is among them, Noah feels slight pressure at having to meet such an important figure of the kingdom. But, as someone born to take on that kind of responsibility, he does not disappoint. After lunch, he bows to Albert Ararat, the 2nd prince and crown prince, as well as Henry Ararat, the 4th prince. Both praise their younger brother's impeccable manners and emphasize that he will possibly become an excellent prime minister in the future. When announcing that he brought a gift for Noah, Albert claps his hands so that a servant enters the room carrying a heavy box that emanates a brutally dark and striking energy. The man struggles so much under its weight that he almost drops it harder than he should. When ordered, the servant opens the box and is overwhelmed by a horrible vision of desperate screams, where men fear being devoured and beg Albert for help. In the middle of this vision, a sword appears, the same sword that is now inside the room. Noah is visibly hesitant about this peculiar weapon, but Albert pushes him to hold it. Since it is a gift from the crown prince, the young boy cannot simply refuse, so he gathers courage and holds the sword. Albert tells him that its name is Leviathan, the most powerful water magic sword in the empire. Around 120 people died trying to tame this relic. Noah becomes slightly desperate upon hearing something so terrible, but his brother reassures him by explaining that if the boy were going to die, he would have died the moment he touched the weapon. Speaking of which, unlike the servant who struggled to carry the box, Noah has an SS rank water attribute, which gives him the power necessary to withstand Leviathan's surreal weight. Noah feels tested on a nearly sadistic level, since his brother knew he could have died when touching the sword. This fills him with anger, but knowing he could harm himself if he said anything, he decides to stay quiet. When leaving the room, Henry asks if it was right to leave such a valuable item with the boy. But Albert sees no problem, because it is better for it to be with someone who has talent worthy of the weapon. Speaking of which, being so capable, Noah should also experience what it feels like to have his hand bitten by his own dog. That night, Noah asked Zoe, one of his maids, why she seemed so down. Despite her reluctance to speak, her master insisted enough to make her open up. The 18-year-old maid finally confesses that she is thinking of taking time off, because a flood recently hit her hometown and destroyed her family's crops, and even her single mother lost her job. Zoe's relatives told her to work in the brothel and serve the imperial prince to help her family. Hearing this, Noah interrupts her and offers a job to the girl's mother in the mansion, with a salary of 10 lions a month. In this case, her only task would be to keep the back door locked. Zoe admits she has never seen such an easy job. especially with a salary above that of most people. Then Noah, without dwelling on the topic, also gives the maid and her mother an empty house in the western area of the city. Crying, Zoe kneels down and thanks him. While the young noble thinks that his title as the 13th prince would be stained if this girl, who has taken care of him since he was little, continued working in a brothel, announcing that she will be his maid for the rest of her life. The noble summons Dylan, his butler, and tells him about the flood in Dasso, Zoe's hometown. Having said that, he orders his subordinate to buy as much land as he can in that city, leaving both employees not understanding anything. Noah then explains that, just like Zoe's family home, some ill-intentioned people will try to extort goods from families who are struggling. So Dylan must save these residents before it's too late. Admitting his surprise, the butler says he had never seen a noble of this age make such a brilliant decision. In reality, Noah obviously cannot say this, but before reincarnating in his former life, he was tired of seeing situations like this. Dylan then asks where the funds will come from, since this would be a high investment of approximately 700,000 lians, and Zoe almost faints upon hearing such a high amount. Noah understands why she is shocked, since the annual income of an adult man in the imperial capital is only 120 lians, and even the prince's own salary is 8,000 lians per year. Besides that, it is important to mention the tax revenue from Almeria which, added to the congratulatory money from the emperor, makes the house of the 13th imperial prince have only around 500,000 lians available. So, in this case, they are missing 200,000 to make the necessary investment in Dasso. With that in mind, the noble decrees the sale of the land south of the imperial capital. Frightened, Dylan reminds him that those lands were a gift from his imperial majesty, and that selling them without permission would be considered an affront. Even so, Noah decides to tank the punishment he'll receive from his father and pushes the project forward, because, according to him, nobles have obligations that sometimes demand sacrifices, and the priority must always be the happiness of the people. According to the young man, this kind of self-control is also a privilege of the nobility. With the decision made, Dylan ends up thanking his lord, and Noah realizes why. The butler is also from Dasso, the region that suffered from the flood. The next day, one of Noah's maids was in the courtyard organizing which box would go in which wagon. Observing the employee's work, Noah is called by Henry, who wants to know where his brother is going. The boy explains his plan to buy land in Dasso to help the population that fell victim to the flood. Then, seeing the water magic sword in one of the carriages in the convoy, the fourth prince asks if the boy is going to use it. Noah replies that he won't, because even though he can feel some kind of power, he still hasn't received any response beyond that still. He decided to take the weapon with him. By the way, Noah asks why his brother came alone, and he says that Albert said something strange, so he asked them to investigate. Apparently, Leviathan has a will of its own and only obeys someone it recognizes as its master. Instantly, Noah thinks that if he isn't accepted by the relic, he will suffer the same horrible fate as the people he saw in his vision. Speaking of which, Henry says he understands why his brother wants to take the sword, but asks him not to use it, since he might die if he does. With Leviathan in the luggage, Noah Ararat heads toward Dasso, and, after the trip, comes face to face with the devastation caused by the flood that swept away much of the city. As Zoe brings her hand to her mouth in fear, the 13th prince asks Dylan to go to the government office, since many houses were carried away by the catastrophe along with their property titles. Therefore, the option is to buy according to the government office's list. Dylan and Zoe are impressed by another brilliant insight from their master, while Noah takes responsibility for anything that may go wrong. After the butler leaves, the noble asks Zoe to show him the region, and as they walk through Dasso's destroyed alleyways, the boy notices that the tubers are also starting to rot, which is yet another sign of the complete destruction suffered by the territory. Even when Zoe recommends that her master not dedicate himself so much to this matter, he insists he will return to Dasso alone if the maid does not want to accompany him. And speaking of missions, they see that the Empire seems to be doing its part in the region, because in the middle of the city, a community soup line has been set up to feed the hungry population that is homeless and unemployed. However, tasting the food himself, Noah sees that the soup is basically pure water, so poor that it is almost rotten, with a terrible taste that makes that clear. Even so, an old man interrupts the noble to say that no one should complain, considering that at least they still have something to eat. Noah tries to explain that the issue is that the Empire would not serve food like this, but the conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a group of men announcing an inspection. According to Zoe, the one responsible is Gallo, a local employee who pinches his nose in disgust as he gets close to the soup. Smiling despite the terrible quality of the rations, one of the inspectors assures that, despite everything, Gallo's share will be delivered to his mansion. Hearing that, Noah approaches and bluntly asks if he is witnessing embezzlement, which makes Gallo laugh at the boldness of this kid. He argues that the region is going through serious difficulties and adds that people who are able to provide help need to be decisively rewarded, which is basically him justifying getting rich in the middle of a tragedy while the people eat water soup. Without backing down, Noah points out the man's crime of enriching himself at the expense of others' suffering. And, enraged, Galil makes it clear that this is also an affront to Lord Rowan, ruler of these lands. With the image of Leviathan in his mind, Noah immediately sentences the inspector to death, and the magic sword flies toward the noble, placing itself at his side as if agreeing with the criminal's punishment. As he unleashes a torrent of water around the boy, Noah feels the relic's power taking hold of him. Just as he takes hold of that extraordinary energy, it's a painful act that causes the human genuine suffering. Yet he had both the talent and the determination to wield that equipment. With the sword in his hand, he orders Leviathan to use its power for the people, as should be done by all those who possess the privilege of strength, the true meaning of nobility. In response, Galil attacks with his sword, but Noah quickly beheads him. The inspector's death triggers a violent reaction from his guards, but before they can strike, Leviathan reacts on its own and creates a crater so massive in the ground that one couldn't even see the bottom. Hearing the commotion, the captain of the knights who govern Dasso arrives at the site of the impact and is stunned when he sees the enormous hole. One of the inspector's subordinates accuses the child of killing Galil, and when he realizes who that child is, Lord Rowan Green runs toward Noah and kneels to show respect to the 13th prince of the Mills Empire. He explains that he belongs to Henry's family, Noah's brother, and that he had been given the task of maintaining public order in the region. Immediately, Rowan announces to everyone present that they stand before the prince, and the subjects kneel in respect. Noah, in turn, reports the embezzlement carried out by the official in charge of inspections in Dasso, justifies Galil's punishment, and even points out the criminal's accomplices, demanding that Rowan punish them as he deems necessary. Lastly, the noble orders the community soup to be remade with royal-level quality, a decision that fills the hungry townspeople with joy. Hours later, when he hears about his younger brother's actions, Albert concludes that Noah was not bitten by a rabid dog. Instead, he made the dog obey him, which means the boy is more useful than he had imagined. The next day, Noah responds to a summons from his father. When he enters the throne room, he anxiously awaits the king's punishment for having sold the lands granted to him in the south of the empire. However, to his surprise, His Majesty thanks his son for preventing the success of those who tried to take advantage of the tragedy in Dasso. The emperor understands that Noah arrived in Dasso by chance through a maid who lived there, but he also believes the boy's deeds were the will of God, especially the fact that he managed to master Leviathan, the water magic sword. Speaking of which, the ruler once again asks Cruz to test his son's power. And when that is done, Noah's status panel appears, showing his water attribute reaching SSS rank. The emperor is delighted, convinced that the boy can still help the empire greatly. In the next moment, we see several parts of the capital of the Mills Empire, the political, cultural, and economic center of the country, a place known as the most glorious and prosperous in the world today. On Reed Street, according to the eunuchs, Noah would find a musical performance taking place. Wanting to repay what the master had done for her homeland, Zoe volunteers to join him on this mission. When they enter a theater, they arrive just in time for the performance of a young girl with pink hair and a melancholic expression, singing a song about how love, at times, can turn into pain. Noah remembers that, according to what he'd been told, the artist's name is Alichi. He notices that her technique is still that of a beginner, but he enjoys what he sees, since it's clear she sings from the heart. However, suddenly, a group of men bursts into the theater, breaking everything. Their leader, a big bald man, orders Alichi to stop singing, claiming that with this income she'll never be able to pay the debt her father left behind. The singer argues that this is the only way she can manage to pay what she owes, but the man suggests that every woman has a very specific way of earning money, and we know exactly what he means. In the midst of this, Noah calmly stands up and cites an article of imperial law, stating that children should not be forced to carry their parents' debts. He also points out that pushing this debt onto the daughter and trying to force her to sell her body is a crime. The man becomes furious and threatens Noah, who responds by using Leviathan's power to subdue the brute and his companions, realizing he would be destroyed if he fought this guy. The bald man runs off, but promises he'll be back, while the entire audience is left speechless upon realizing they are in the presence of an imperial prince. Noah says he enjoyed the girl's singing and asks what her monthly expenses are. Embarrassed, she explains that she needs to pay for her mother's medical treatment. So Noah decides to give her a monthly payment of 25 lians so she can sing peacefully whenever she wants or needs, promising to increase the amount whenever she improves. Later, the noble returns to his humble residence, where he is greeted by his humble servants cleaning his humble shoes. He asks who those men causing trouble at the theater were, and Evelyn explains that they are known for lending money illegally in the region, in other words, classic loan sharks. By the way, upon discovering who they had been dealing with, the troublemakers found the decency to bow at the prince's gate to apologize for what they had done. But Noah orders the maids to send them away. After all, criminals, especially criminals, cannot speak to an imperial prince whenever they please. Henry appears at the house entrance, praising his brother's stance, since accepting people like that so easily lowers the status of the imperial house and its princes. Noah understands that this is one reason, but there is another behind it. Still, he wants to reveal this reason to his brother inside the house, in a private conversation. So the two gather, and Noah tells him about the singer he is helping, and that he needs to act firmly with the loan sharks, so they understand Alachi is not alone. Henry asks if the vocal slap she gave him was a good one, and the short prince admits he's still dizzy. Henry didn't think a kid his age would get this far, especially considering Frank and Gary, who are around Noah's age and aren't even close. Gary, for example, is still an immature brat who never learns proper etiquette. Hearing this, Noah reflects that although they are all brothers, each one has a different mother. However, Henry and Gary, who share the same mother, must have a different type of connection. Changing the subject, Henry comments that Noah seems to have mastered the magic sword well, and the boy says that this is thanks to his brother, who taught him that Leviathan has a will of its own. Even so, the older brother wants to know how the kid carries that huge thing around, since it's far too big for him. Noah then summons the sword in front of his brother, and explains that he hides it in his sleeve in miniature form, a trick the sword itself taught him. Impressed, Henry remarks that this is unprecedented, since Leviathan was kept isolated for 200 years as a national treasure, and there are no records mentioning anything like this in the past. It is an incredible achievement for Noah. When night falls and the two princes finally appear at the gate, the loan sharks are still there, bowing. Eventually, after waiting so long, the big guy loses his patience and demands not to be ignored by the arrogant brat. His companions try to stop him from speaking like that, but it was too late. The damage was done. With just a slight movement, Noah somehow affects the man, making him choke and quickly become obedient. Henry asks what on earth his brother did, and Noah explains that he simply released a bit of Leviathan's power as a form of domination. In the end, Henry compliments the control the boy demonstrates over the magic sword. A few hours later, answering an invitation, Noah rides by carriage to a location where he is greeted by a man named Radok, who leads the prince into a huge hall full of impeccably dressed people applauding the appearance of one of the king's most beloved and respected sons. Radok is curious about the weapon the boy carries, and Noah explains that it is Leviathan, a magic sword given to him by the crown prince. This information leaves everyone stunned, since it is a national treasure personally granted by Albert Ararat. Knowing that the 13th prince's domain is Almiri, the crowd connects this territory with the sword Noah carries. In the middle of all the chatter, however, there is a brief moment of silence just like in an episode of El Chavo, only one guy happens to be talking, and he's ironically mocking the prince's sword, saying it looks like one of those toy swords that light up when you press a button and are sold in department stores. Noah looks straight at the man, who pretends it wasn't him, but Leviathan knew well who it was. Without delay, the sword releases a dark miasma that starts suffocating and driving the people in the hall insane. Noah demands that the weapon stop doing that and points out that loyalty is good, but this was an exaggeration after all. It was clear the sword got angry after hearing its master being disrespected. Despite the tense moment, Radok applauds the imperial prince and highlights the vast power of national treasures, since it became obvious that everyone there had the privilege of feeling the same sensation of death through his highness's overwhelming power. Immediately, the guests begin applauding Noah Ararat as if he hadn't nearly killed everyone, while Radok asks the prince what should be done with the laid-back guy who spoke badly about Leviathan. Noah replies that they should just ignore him because what comes from below doesn't reach you. Then, some guests are brought forward to meet his highness, one of them being a famous merchant known as Lance Allison. However, the ones who catch the prince's attention the most are the two people who appear next, a man who introduces himself as Byron Allen, administrator of the Allen Mercantile Company. Beside him, not very comfortable with these situations, a girl introduces herself as Cindy Allen. Right away, Noah asks if she is adopted, because Byron seems to be someone from the second or third generation and carries the mannerisms of the upper class, unlike the girl. Besides that, he also noticed that Cindy had been a slave in the past, since from the moment she arrived her gaze has been one of intense observation, the eyes of someone who had once been enslaved. Impressed, Allen confirms the prince's suspicions and admits that he bought Cindy, but that she is smart and learns things quickly. However, contrary to what the merchant expected, the prince admires and encourages this kind of thing. even inviting the man to visit his mansion someday to talk more about the child. Upon hearing this, the people around them react as if Byron had won the lottery, and all the attention and envy in the hall shift toward the merchant and his daughter as he withdraws from his highness's presence. When he leaves, Noah comments to Radok that there is another reason he knew she wasn't his real daughter. Whenever the prince reaches for his sword, the girl immediately turns toward it with full focus, which proves Cindy has been protecting Alan since the first threat. Later, after the event, Noah Ararat goes to the marketplace and happens to run into one of his brothers, Oscar. Seeing that Noah is free, Oscar invites him to look for some treasures, since they are on Cobalt Street, a place where various antiques from all over the Empire gather, some of which can have great value. Of course, many forgeries are placed among the original pieces, so one needs to be careful in order to conduct a true treasure hunt without walking out of there with a cheap knockoff. Sometime later, after a long search, Oscar ends up giving up on finding anything worthwhile. Noah, on the other hand, finds a book he finds interesting and, for the symbolic price of 3 lions, manages to get the item for himself. Oscar asks whether that is the treasure they were looking for, but Noah was just curious about it. That said, his brother takes a more serious look at the book and realizes that this is definitely a spell grimoire by the legendary mage Andrea, which is probably worth around 1,000 lions. Oscar asks how Noah knew that, but the truth is he had no idea. He only knew that his wind magic increased when he touched the item. On that note, noticing his sword trembling in the sheath, Noah draws Leviathan and points the blade at the grimoire. Since the only ones capable of increasing his abilities are those that possess a will of their own, which seems to be the case with this book. As expected, the book opens and releases what Oscar believes to be the vengeful spirit of the mage who mastered wind magic. As if it were a shadowy entity, that ghostly manifestation seems dangerous enough to make anyone run away in fear, anyone except Noah Ararat, who, wielding his magic sword, uses its water power to expel the spirit with relative ease. Worried and still unable to fully believe what he saw, Oscar asks about the potential damage to the city from the magic his brother used, but Noah explains that he fired upward, avoiding any such problem, which impresses Oscar even more due to how quick and correct that decision was. In the midst of this, the owner of an antique shop named Alan Bardsley bows before the princes, and, after seeing what Noah is capable of with magical items, tells him he has a special treasure he needs to show the young noble. Thus, Noah and Oscar go to the merchant's shop, where he displays a ring that, according to him, will only reveal its true power when the rightful owner appears. He has already shown this relic to many different people, but nothing special has ever happened. Faced with this, Noah wonders if the thing might be fake or simply useless. But of course Bardsley has considered that, and even tried throwing it away, yet it always returned to the shop as if nothing had happened, which made him believe there really is something unusual about it. Since he sees his brother as someone who has a certain affinity with untamable magical items, Oscar asks Noah to put the ring on, which he does. When he does, the ring emits a glow and, with a voice only the bearer can hear, announces that its rarity level is SSS and recognizes Noah as its true owner. With that, a gray mass begins spreading around the boy's body, forming an armor that doesn't increase any of his stats, but seems to be a different kind of entity from the others, with many possible uses. Satisfied with this, Noah says he will send payment for the item to Alan. But Oscar insists on paying and giving the ring as a gift, since he has increasingly seen that there is something different inside his brother that needs to be encouraged. After that meeting at Alan's shop, Oscar gives his brother a ride back home, and the moment the boy steps out of the carriage, he's attacked by the big, bald loan shark who had only been waiting for the right moment to settle the score. Noah reacts immediately, using the power of his ring to conjure a shield made from the strange material the item produces, blocking the sword strike thrown by the attacker. Right after that, one of Noah's servants takes advantage of the moment to knock the loan shark down and subdue him. Oscar asks how his brother managed to do that, and Noah explains that he connected the ring to Leviathan, which seems to have acted as an automatic defense in response to the hostility. Hearing this, as always, Oscar is once again impressed by how the boy managed to master that item in such a short amount of time. Sometime later, Noah Ararat returns to the theater where he first found Alichi. Since he dealt with the lone shark, he believes the singer will finally have the peace she deserves, convinced that the man won't bother her again. However, that's far from the truth. 2 drunkards who were drinking themselves senseless in the place had the nerve to climb onto the stage and start fighting over the girl, acting as if she were a waitress obligated to serve them more drinks while clearly being interested in something more than that. Just as the 2 are about to throw a punch, Noah places his magical shield between them and ends up breaking at least 1 bone in each of their hands when they strike the barrier. Then, with his sword, he slices their clothes apart and forces them to flee the theater in their underwear. Seeing that the clientele of this establishment isn't exactly well-mannered, Noah demands that the owner stop unbearable drunks like those from coming in, but the man laments that, unfortunately, that kind of drunk is literally the entire audience that keeps the place running. Since that's the case, the prince decides to buy the whole dump for 1,000 lians, an amount so high it leaves the guy emotional. Alichi, in turn, thanks him for everything the noble has been doing for her and asks if she can somehow repay all this kindness. Noah then reminds her that the only thing he expects is for her to sing working hard so that one day even the emperor himself might want to hear her voice. And so, the promising young girl begins a song that moves the audience. As time went by, on a certain day, Noah Ararat received a visit from Dead Murray, the general governor of Hajoy, which was Noah's fief. The imperial family had a tradition of granting fiefs to princes so they could learn how to administer them, and the title of lord made the residents view these aristocrats as true masters. This was no different for Dead Murray, originally from Almeria, but now working in Hajoy. By imperial order, he had been assigned to control the floods in that region. But the mission had not been going well. Hajoy was a fertile area that produced grain along the bend of a great river. Although this offered the opportunity for abundant harvests, it came with an obvious drawback. The river could overflow and flood the place. According to the governor, the difficulty in resolving the issue came from the fact that Hajoy had not yet received the funds needed for the project. Despite being an imperial order, the Ministry of Finance kept presenting excuses instead of transferring the money that would help resolve the crisis. Already imagining what this was about, the talented young noble wasted no time and went straight to the mansion of the finance commissioner, Maybrick, who was calmly eating his steak while receiving one of the emperor's sons. Before anything else, Noah told the commissioner to shut his mouth if he planned to say this was something a child wouldn't understand, which immediately made the man realize he might be underestimating someone despite his young age. Forcing a strained smile, Maybrick explained that the flooding in Hajoy had saddened Emperor Ararat so much that he had exempted the fief from paying taxes for the entire year, and that this lack of tax revenue was the reason there was no money available. Noah instantly asked if the commissioner was joking, leaving both Maybrick and Dead Murray stunned by the harsh, direct way the boy spoke. According to Noah, taxes stopped being collected because there were no taxes to collect an act of kindness from the crown. Yet the commissioner behaved as if that were a valid excuse to withhold funds from a fief in need. Feeling the pressure, Maybrick changed his explanation and argued that the national treasury had no available funds because it was focused on building a new summer resort for Emperor Ararat, so that he could spend his vacation somewhere cooler than the capital. Hearing this, Noah lost his patience and pointed out the commissioner's disrespect toward Hajoy by prioritizing the construction of a vacation home over helping a flooded fief. He then threatened to involve the emperor directly so the matter could be resolved properly. At this, Maybrick panicked and knelt before the prince, begging for mercy. Noah agreed to let it go as long as the commissioner sent the budget to Hajoy immediately. At once, Maybrick rushed off to fulfill the order, and Dead Murray was left impressed that this boy had forced such an important member of the crown to his knees without yielding even a little. The governor apologized for involving the prince in the matter and left to handle the flooding using the funds sent. After this meeting, just as Dead Murray was departing, Noah was informed of a summons from Emperor Ararat. He responded to the call and, upon meeting his father, received praise for resolving the issue in Hajoy. Noah was surprised the emperor already knew what had happened, considering it had just taken place, and the emperor explained that information is a weapon one his son should constantly strive to refine. Noah replied that he had simply done what was natural in such a case. But Emperor Ararat said that doing what is natural is difficult, as many people have smooth speech and flattery, but few who truly make the easy seem easy. In any case, placing a hand on his son's head, he expressed how impressed he was with the boy, who was only 6 years old. When the ruler told him to stand, he noticed that the sword Leviathan had shrunk in size to match its master's height. Noah figured that his own mansion was obviously part of the emperor's information network as well. His father admired the boy's control over a magic sword with such a terrible history. Those words made Noah remember the gala event in which Leviathan had been provoked by that man, releasing the macabre miasma that almost suffocated everyone. Regardless, the emperor believed it was a good idea to assign the prince an appropriate instructor so he could handle the magic sword as safely as possible. Thus, he summoned Damian Noble, the greatest swordsman in the empire, who would be responsible for teaching the young noble the art of swordsmanship. To Noah's surprise, Damian Noble asked to test the boy in a duel. Emperor Ararat reminded him that his son was only a child, but the instructor explained that he simply wished to assess the boy's talent, not his technique. When the ruler allowed the duel, Noah was even more impressed by how confidently Damian had persuaded the emperor so quickly. Damian Noble told Noah to attack however he wished, and the boy charged straight at him. In that moment, he felt Leviathan's memories of its former masters rising within him. A clash ensued between the two swordsmen, and after a few exchanges, Noah shocked everyone by disarming his opponent. By doing this, the boy expected nothing less from a magic sword that had accepted him as its master. Clearly, Leviathan's previous owners had been highly skilled. Even more astonishing, Damian Noble knelt before his imperial majesty and declared that he had nothing to teach the child. Though Noah still still had the physical strength of a young boy, he had used technique to disarm the Empire's greatest swordsman. This meant the prince already possessed the ability of a master, and Damien believed it would be presumptuous to think he could teach anything to such a child. Hearing this, the Emperor let out a laugh and appointed his son as the chief examiner for this year's selection of knights. Unable to believe what he was hearing, Noah bowed before the leader of the Empire and promised to do his best to fulfill his new role. The selection of knights in which the boy was placed is a major annual event that involves the entire Empire. After all, this is a nation of warriors that values its own class, where the path of martial arts is seen as the only way to achieve success through merit. In this selection, the warriors who won preliminary fights throughout the country will face each other in a deadly battle in the capital, and the winner will receive the title of knight and enter the upper class. The first task of a knight is to become a subordinate of the selection officer, who, in this case, will be Noah Ararat this year. Having a good knight as a member of his team will certainly make the young prince stronger. With that, the Emperor asks whether his son will choose his candidates based on brute strength, or if he will choose the winner. So Noah establishes that the regional preliminary rounds will be eliminated and the entire selection will take place in the imperial capital. Noah wants everyone to fight in front of him because the empire is huge, making it impossible to follow every regional qualifying round. And it would be a shame if a great talent were lost because of that difficulty. Later, in his mansion, while being served tea by Zoe, he asks the maid whether people from her village are interested in applying for the knight selection. And she explains that they are, because this is the only chance for ordinary people like them to become someone important. That's why every year there is a representative from there. Then Noah tells her that he eliminated the regional championship, meaning anyone who wants to participate can do so without going through that filter. Zoe seems happy about this, but sad at the same time. After the master's insistence, she confesses she feels this way because the real reason why Dassault only sends one representative each year is that it is difficult for them to pay for travel and lodging costs in the capital, which is an expensive place, since the person sent can only go thanks to donations from the other residents. Because Dassault's candidate carries the expectations of the entire population into the selection, the whole town always mobilizes for it. Regarding this issue, Noah says he would also like to eliminate this difficulty, because his idea is to do everything possible so that he can check all potential talents and not miss anything. So he decides to cover all expenses related to sending the candidates. Zoe finds it incredible, although she points out that it will be a costly decision. And Noah argues that there is no need to prepare everything from scratch. He then summons Dylan and orders him to buy all vacant houses that exist in the imperial capital. But if that is not enough to accommodate all candidates, the butler must have a dormitory built. In addition, Noah orders Dylan to contact all merchants he knows to announce a meeting with the prince to solve the issue of the candidates' meals. Later, when meeting with Byron Allen and receiving an estimate of how much he will spend on food during the tests, Noah notices that the price is much lower than he expected, and the merchant says he made a special price because it is a request from the 13th prince. However, Noah states categorically that the merchant would never give such a discount out of kindness, which embarrasses Byron Allen for having underestimated the lord because of his age. In any case, the merchant informs him that while the knight selection is happening, there will also be a test to recruit servants for the palace, and Byron Allen would like to know something about the tendencies of the approved candidates. Imagining that Byron Allen wants to send a woman to the palace, Noah responds that if there was someone in the palace under the merchant's control, he could obtain information quickly, and the benefits would be even greater if Emperor Ararat ordered that woman to spend the night with him. Sweating cold at such an extreme statement, the merchant proceeds and says he has already made the payment in advance. So Noah promises to make the recommendation if the candidate is a woman he genuinely likes. With this matter settled, Byron Allen kneels before the prince and, seeing him as the best person to receive this request, the man wishes to include the 13th prince's crest on the sign of his shop, which is a clear demonstration of subordination. Before anything else, Noah makes it clear that he does not forgive betrayal. Upon leaving the meeting at night, the boy reflects in his carriage on how his status has risen by having Byron Allen under his command, which is an important step toward becoming stronger. However, Noah is startled when he notices that his water status has decreased and assumes something must have happened in Almeria. He tells Zoe to inform the coachman that they must go straight to the palace to meet Emperor Ararat immediately. When he meets with his father, surprisingly, the emperor already seems to know that something is happening in Almeria, even before Noah says anything. Not because he knows exactly what is going on, but because he is sensing the signs, while Noah states that there is certainly some problem occurring. At that moment, a servant approaches Emperor Ararat and whispers information into his ear. Impressed with his son's intuition, the ruler reveals that a rebellion is taking place in Almeria and asks his son how serious he believes the problem is. Noah analyzes that if the SS of his water rank became an S, it seems like it was cut in half, but in reality it is only one level below all levels. In other words, at the moment the prince believes the rebellion is small in scale. The emperor says the answer is correct, since according to the report, this revolt involves around 5,000 people, the equivalent of a small army that is now roaming Noah's fief. By the way, Emperor Ararat asks whether the boy wants to defeat the rebels alone. But Noah does not believe that would be possible, since he is still too young and does not know the battlefield, which might cause the soldiers to reject listening to an inexperienced leader. If a prince must take command of the situation, it should be one of his brothers. The emperor admits he did not expect a negative answer, even after Noah analyzed the case objectively, but wants to know whom the boy recommends in his place. Noah recommends Henry because, given the scale of the rebellion, the best approach would be to suppress it directly, and his brother Henry, being the most prudent of the princes, should be able to act accurately. The emperor sees this as a perfect choice and orders Henry to be called. A short time later, when the 21-year-old fourth prince is summoned for the mission, he travels by carriage alongside Noah and asks why he didn't seize that opportunity, since this is a nation of warriors that values this kind of situation greatly. Noah says that it is a very sudden situation about which he knows very little, and even if he personally doesn't die, his soldiers would certainly die in large numbers. That said, Noah senses a presence through Leviathan's power and orders the carriage to stop, because now that he sees himself as the target of this problem, he doesn't want to involve his brother in it. Without delay, when a group of hooded, armed men surrounds the prince and tries to trap him with water-based snares, Noah realizes they are Almerian rebels. One of the rebels physically attacks Noah, but in return he receives a sword strike that takes him out of the fight. Even so, the other enemies charge at the 13th prince, beginning a general battle that young Ararat handles with ease, subduing each opponent with Leviathan's power until the very last one. After winning the fight, Noah receives praise from his brother for how much he has developed in such a short time. According to Henry, the rebel army is made up mainly of cavalry soldiers, and he did not expect to encounter others like these. By the way, the fourth prince wonders whether it wouldn't have been better to extract information from the attackers, but Noah explains that he didn't kill any of them, he only left them unconscious through Leviathan's intimidation, after knocking them down with a blow, since the rebels would possibly take their own lives before being interrogated. Remembering what his brother said about the rebels being mostly cavalry, Noah notes that Almeria is weak in the production of war horses. The following day, he summons Byron Allen because of his business dealings near Almeria. First of all, the prince clarifies that the merchant is a dead man if this conversation leaks, and then he explains the rebellion and the possibility that the enemy army is made up mainly of cavalry. After giving 10,000 leans to the merchant, Noah orders him to buy all the horse feed. Byron Allen asks whether he should disregard human rations, and the prince says they won't be necessary. According to the young prince, Almeria has no war industry, and according to his brother Henry, it seems that the horses used for the army were bought from outside, and if that is the case, there is a limit to how much feed can be taken from the population. Byron Allen argues that, if it were the soldiers' food, it would lead to looting, but that is exactly what Noah wants. Impressed with his master's intelligence, Byron Allen promises to begin the strategy right away. Soon after, in the kingdom's castle, the emperor discovers that the rebels tried to capture Noah to use him as a bargaining chip. The boy also tells his father that the captured rebel confessed far too easily, which could mean he is lying. Emperor Ararat praises his son's perception but emphasizes that there is nothing to worry about, since there is a way to find out whether someone is telling the truth. Imagining it might involve torture, Noah stays quiet because he doesn't understand anything about that. His father points out that the empire would have to make very difficult decisions if the 13th prince had been captured. He also says he is impressed that the boy chose the feed supply as his target. Noah is surprised to hear this, considering he had just ordered them to buy all the horse feed. Emperor Ararat adds that, if this were only a siege, someone else could surely have had the same idea. For example, Albert, the crown prince, would have let the rebels starve so it would serve as a warning for the next rebellion. But Noah is thinking about the possibility of an invasion by his own people, and created a siege only against the horses, even using personal funds. Without a doubt, this is a very intelligent and difficult tactic, and the leader of the empire is impressed with his son's sharpness. For this reason, he allows Noah to add a sword to his coat of arms. Speechless, the young boy reflects on how the Mills Empire is a nation of warriors whose greatest symbol is the sword, and using it on a coat of arms without the supreme leader's permission can even lead to the death penalty, since it is an honor of the highest level. Finally, Emperor Ararat orders crews to issue a decree about it, and Noah expresses all his gratitude. After leaving the meeting with his father, the boy meets Byron Allen and learns that the amount of processed grain that can be transported as feed is limited. Byron Allen also says he can discover the delivery route and that monopolizing the purchase wouldn't be difficult. As for the rebel leader, Karhun, he seems to be a vengeful man capable of using any means to achieve his goals. Therefore, every precaution is necessary. even for His Highness Noah Ararat. In the middle of that, Evelyn interrupts the conversation to warn her master that there is a badly injured man at the main gate claiming to have an urgent report. When he arrives, Noah meets the man, who introduces himself as captain of a 10-soldier battalion in the province of Adra, in Almeria. He reports the rebellion and reveals that his superior was the main person responsible, but that he refused to take part and came to expose the situation. Byron Allen regrets that this is the urgent report, since Noah already knows about the rebellion, but the prince thanks him for the information, orders them to treat the wounded captain, and even asks that he be given a reward of 1,000 leans, which is a small fortune. Byron Allen questions the reason for this, since everyone already knew the information the officer brought. Noah explains that this is the best way to repay the loyalty of a man who, even seriously injured, traveled a long distance to warn them about the rebellion. Near nightfall, Zoe enters her master's office visibly pale and shaken. According to her, an unknown person gave her a pouch with about 500 leans and said it was the reward if she made the 13th prince drink a sleeping substance she now holds in her hands. Noah concludes that the rebels really do want to capture him, and asks why she didn't go ahead and do what they requested. Zoe says she would never betray her master, because he helped not only her family but her whole village. Still, she cries as she confesses that she would be killed if she didn't do what she was ordered to do. Then, the young Noah Ararat writes a check for the same amount the rebels used to try to buy the maid's betrayal, but with an extra 5,000 leans. Unable to believe such an amount, the maid says she cannot accept it, but her master insists. Above all, this is not even the biggest surprise Noah gives her. To leave the woman even more stunned, the noble says he will take the sleeping drug, and when he does, he wants Zoe to hand him over to the rebels and then flee and hide immediately, because they will obviously try to silence her. Thus, sometime later, Noah slowly opens his eyes in a hideout, where two men in another room were talking about how the last resort to prevent the prince from escaping was to kill him with their leader's sinister dagger. Noah realizes his hands and feet are tied, so he takes from inside his ear a small magic item that transforms into Leviathan. In addition, they fortunately did not remove the ring from his finger, so he uses the magical accessory to cut his ropes. Looking around, he sees that he is not in a room, but in the back of a wagon. Next, Noah asks Leviathan to show its memories. After taking the sleeping drug and falling asleep, the 13th prince was surrounded by rebels who invaded his mansion after Zoe allowed them in. However, she created a distraction and escaped. And since they couldn't miss the opportunity to take the prince, they ignored her, tied Noah Ararat up, and took him away in a cart. After seeing what happened, the prince climbs on top of the wagon and appears armed before all the rebels who were resting around a campfire. One of the men draws his sword and reminds him that the kid no longer has his brother to help him. Noah then slashes the enemy in a movement so fast that the man didn't even have time to react. After that, the boy laments that this was a useless mission, because he wanted to obtain relevant information, but was kidnapped only by lower-ranking subordinates who know nothing. The rebels become furious at the audacity of this brat and attack. Noah then shows the fatal result of combining his talent with swordsmanship and Leviathan's power, even though he did not use his water magic this time. After finishing off all the enemies, the noble sees Zoe approaching from afar, accompanied by several imperial soldiers. He asks what she is doing there, since he told her to run, but Zoe couldn't bear it. She needed to see how her master was doing, because she was dying of worry. While the soldiers stared in amazement at the rebels' bodies on the ground, Zoe assumed her master had done all of that on his own. Noah ordered the captain of the platoon to deal with the corpses, but when the officer was about to pick up the sword of one of the dead men, the prince warned him at the last moment that he must not touch the weapon. To everyone's surprise, Noah told them to step back, and then a dark miasma rose from the sword, making Noah realize that this was the sinister dagger they had been talking about. The prince felt a strong killing intent coming from the dagger, and, through Leviathan, he could even sense within it the resentment of the person who had cursed the blade, manifesting the image of a man who could only be Karhun, the leader of the rebels. Leviathan, in turn, displayed all its power by releasing into the sky a miasma as black as the one coming from the weapon, and this force of shadows curved around the atmosphere to strike Karhun directly, right where he stood. The next day, once again, Noah was summoned to report to his father, who, by this point, and as always already knew about the good work his son had done the day before. In fact, the first thing he did was praise him, since the leader of the rebels had been struck in the forehead by a jet of water that appeared out of nowhere the previous night. Naturally, Emperor Ararat assumed the one responsible was Noah and his magic sword. Noah, in turn, never stops being impressed by how quickly his father gets this information. Thinking to himself, he recalls that he used the resentment embedded in the dagger as a marker, then aimed Leviathan's long-range shot at its owner and hit Karhun dead on. With that, the rebels of Almeria lost their greatest leader and were consequently suppressed by the 4th Imperial Prince, Henry. After the battle, almost everyone who planned the rebellion was arrested, and in a throne room filled with important guests, His Imperial Majesty ordered that the cattle and horses be prepared, because the entire family of those responsible would be dismembered. The nobles around him agreed with the punishment, until Noah asked to speak and surprised everyone by expressing an opinion contrary to the sentence. With a stern face, Emperor Ararat demanded an explanation, and Noah replied that the punishment must be in accordance with imperial law, which states that the leader of an act of treason must be sentenced to death by decapitation. His relatives up to the 3rd degree and his accomplices must be hanged, and the others must be beheaded depending on their level of involvement. The boy understood that if his father violated the law, it would bring chaos to the world, so he asked him to reconsider his decision. After reflecting for a few seconds, Emperor Ararat acknowledged that his son was right and thanked him for speaking, but refused to accept such a small punishment, announcing instead the maximum penalty as long as it remained within the law. With that decided, he ordered Prime Minister Noise Hill to handle the rest. Those present in the throne room were impressed by the intervention of the 13th prince, and the people of the empire only grew in their admiration for the prodigy that is Noah Ararat. Amid this, Emperor Ararat recognized that it was thanks to his son that he avoided leaving a stain on history, and therefore granted him a new title. If it were only a matter of reprimanding the emperor, any of his children could have done it. But Noah's rare quality was guiding his father toward the right thing to do. Thus, so the world may know the young man's wisdom, Emperor Ararat named Noah with the title of sage, something unheard of for a prince. The ruler even lamented that the boy had not been born earlier. With that done, the people acclaimed Imperial Prince Noah, the sage, remembering that the knight selection would soon take place. The emperor asked whether his son had already decided how he would choose, and Noah replied that he had an idea, but preferred to show it later. In the next scene, in a courtyard of the castle, Noah took a sip from his teacup and then asked the men around him to throw on him the bucket of water they were holding. When the first servant did so, the boy's ring acted on its own and blocked the water with its magic protection, leaving Emperor Ararat astonished. The other 3 men did the same, and each time the accessory protected its user. After demonstrating his idea in practice, Noah explained that he would conduct the knight selection by having them attack him, observing how far they would advance. From this, his father understood that the idea would reduce Noah's burden and allow him to endure the long selection process without trouble. But he warned of the danger involved. If someone strong enough were present in the test, the protection might be broken. Noah, however, assured him that he was aware and prepared for that. Trusting his son's intelligence, the father did not oppose the decision and praised the ability of the new sage. In the late afternoon, in a more secluded part of the palace, Prime Minister Noise Hill commented to the emperor that it had been risky to say in public that he wished Noah had been born earlier. But Emperor Ararat saw no problem with it. After all, the boy had not only given him valuable advice, but had also killed an enemy leader without even going to the battlefield, something that had never happened before. Furthermore, as expected, the boy's magic sword confirmed that it possessed terrifying power. Standing before a staircase, Emperor Ararat ordered crews to bring the coffin resting at the top of it. According to him, legend says that Leviathan's true seal must never be broken, but perhaps Noah is capable of changing that story. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.